Hey everyone, ready to dive into something kind of heavy today? We're tackling divine punishments. The idea that if you mess with the powers that be, there will be some serious cosmic payback.
Yeah, it's a concept that seems to pop up across cultures and history. This idea that there are consequences for pushing those boundaries, whether it's angering the gods or tempting fate.
And to help us unpack all of this, we're taking a look at the ultimate tier list of divine punishments, which is exactly what it sounds like.
It's actually a pretty fascinating read because it lays out different punishments, ranking them from those grounded in history to concepts that are just, well, inconceivable.
So get ready to explore how people throughout time have imagined facing those ultimate consequences. We're not just talking fire and brimstone here, though I'm sure we'll get there. We're talking punishments that range from relatable historical events to stuff that'll make you question the very fabric of reality.
And that's what I find so interesting about this whole topic.
Yeah.
Trying to understand what these punishments reveal about different cultures, their values, their relationship with the universe, their fears.
Right, like what were they trying to make sense of? Okay, so before we get to the really out there stuff, the ultimate tier list starts off with something a little more grounded, what they call Tier C logical and historically plausible punishments. Think natural disasters, exile, plagues, basically, events that were often seen as divine retribution.
It's one of those things that's hard to really grasp today, but imagine living in a time when a flood, drought, or plague wasn't just a natural disaster, it was a sign, like a direct message from the gods that something wasn't right.
Yikes, talk about pressure. Dear gods, it's me again. Sorry about that whole drought thing.
Right. Take the biblical flood, for example. Whether you take it literally or metaphorically, it's endured as this powerful example of divine judgment on a massive scale. And then you have ancient Egypt, where the Nile was their lifeline so naturally. Droughts were seen as this direct consequence of the pharaoh's ability to keep the gods happy.
Can you imagine being in charge and every time the well runs dry, it's your bad? I'd be stocking up on rain dances.
Right. And let's not forget the Black Death in the 14th century, one of the most devastating pandemics in history. Even with everything we know now, back then, many saw it as divine punishment.
Wow. It makes you think about how our ancestors must have processed those events, how they reconciled that level of devastation with their faith, with their understanding of the world. That had to shape their worldview, right?
Absolutely. It wasn't just a theological debate. These were very real interpretations of events that directly impacted their lives.
So we've just dipped our toes into Tier C, where punishments were terrifying, yeah, but often rooted in these observable natural events. But get ready, because the ultimate tier list is about to take us from the realm of the historically plausible to something a little more mythological.
Things definitely get a little more, shall we say, creative as we move into Tier B. We're talking about punishments that, while rooted in mythology, still feel, plausible within those worldviews.
Right. It's like, okay, I can see that happening. Maybe I should think twice about angering the gods.
Exactly. And this tier is full of those classic punishments we tend to picture with mythology. You got your getting struck by lightning, courtesy of Zeus, usually, or those generational curses that could follow your family line for, well, eternity. The House of Atreus in Greek mythology comes to mind. Talk about family drama.
It does make you wonder if those stories were meant to be a little on the nose, like, hey, maybe don't make deals with deities you don't understand.
It's possible. They could definitely be cautionary tales about the importance of things like keeping oaths and, basic hospitality toward your fellow man and God, apparently.
And of course, we can't forget about those mythological glow-ups or, maybe that's not the right word, I'm talking about transformations.
Ah, yes. Being turned into an animal or object, always a classic. It's like the ultimate be careful what you wish for scenario.
Or in this case, be careful who you anger because you might end up as a tree, though I guess it depends on the tree.
That's true. Some transformations were definitely harsher than others. But it's interesting, these transformations always seem to reflect this idea that everything is connected. Like you do something to disrupt that balance and you literally become part of it in a new, often less desirable way.
Speaking of memorable transformations, Lot's wife comes to mind. Turns back to look at the destruction of Sodom and bam, pillar of salt.
A classic cautionary tale about rubbernecking. But in all seriousness, I do think these mythological punishments, even when they seem outlandish, give us this fascinating glimpse into the values and fears of the cultures that created them.
Right, like they were trying to make sense of the world around them, those unexplainable events, or even just reinforce certain social norms like, hey, don't be that guy who angers the gods. Nobody wants to be stuck cleaning up a pillar of salt.
Exactly. And you see those themes continue to evolve as we go further down the list. Things become less about those earthly punishments and a whole lot more about the soul and what happens after we die.
Right, because Tier A is where we get into those high-level supernatural punishments, consequences that last a lot longer than your average Tuesday.
We're talking the loss of immortality, banishment to some terrifying underworld, even the possibility of doomed reincarnation, fun stuff like that.
The ancient Greeks really seemed to have a flair for these, like they had a whole catalog of eternal punishments, each more creative than the last.
They did love their drama. You have to admit, Tartarus, their version of an underworld for, like, the worst offenders is a pretty evocative concept.
Mm-hmm.
And they really seem to lean into that whole eye for an eye thing, with punishments tailored to specific crimes.
Can't forget about Sisyphus either. I mean, eternally pushing that boulder uphill only to have it roll back down. That's rough, buddy.
Talk about a recipe for some serious existential dread. But, it does make you think that punishment, as absurd as it seems, says something about how the ancient Greeks viewed purpose, right? Like the idea of eternal, meaningless toil that was their version of true suffering.
It's a very specific kind of hell, but Sisyphus isn't the only one who got a raw deal in the immortality department. What about Prometheus? The guy who steals fire from the gods and brings it to humanity?
Oh, yeah, Prometheus. A real titan of industry, except, well, not quite.
And by not quite, we mean chained to a rock, having his liver pecked out by an eagle every single day.
And just to add insult to injury, that liver just grows back so the whole thing can start all over again. It does make you appreciate a good Prometheus-themed party game a little less, doesn't it?
Definitely puts a damper on things. But of all the punishments in this tier, I have to say the one that really gets me is the idea of doomed reincarnation. That one hits a little too close to home.
Right. That's a concept that pops up in a lot of Eastern traditions, where your actions in this life directly affect your next life for better or, for much, much worse.
It's like the ultimate karmic report card. And instead of getting a bad grade, you come back as a slug. No offense to slugs, of course.
It definitely makes you rethink that whole treat others how you want to be treated thing, doesn't it?
And it's not always about coming back as something kind of gross. Some traditions describe these whole realms dedicated to specific types of suffering, right? Like, oh, you messed up this way. Welcome to the eternal fire ant colony.
Right. It's like a cosmic choose-your-own-adventure gone wrong. No matter what path you take, it leads to some form of karmic payback.
Okay, see, that's way scarier than anything I could come up with. But as wild as all that is, the ultimate tier list doesn't stop there. In fact, it kind of kicks things into overdrive as we get into the S tier, and above which, fair warning, things get a little out there.
This is where it goes from exploring these cultural interpretations of punishment to, I don't know, almost trying to make sense of things that are beyond our understanding.
Right. It's like we're talking about punishments so abstract, so reality bending that they make things like doomed reincarnation feel like, I don't know, a walk in the park. We're talking about being erased from existence, endless time loops, becoming some horrifying monster for all eternity, and those are just a few examples.
It's almost like in these higher tiers, the punishments are less about like an eye for an eye and more about, I don't know, exploring the nature of suffering itself.
Yeah.
Or even existence and our own limited ability to understand those concepts.
So S tier, we hit the classics. Eternal suffering, fire, brimstone, the whole deal, or just being completely wiped from existence, which I guess, depending on your perspective, could be a mercy. Or absolutely terrifying.
It's a tough one, right? Is it better to suffer for eternity or just poof, never have been at all? It's kind of like that old saying about whether it's better to have loved and lost, except instead of heartbreak, we're talking about, well, everything.
Okay, that's a lot to process. And then, as if things couldn't get weirder, we jump to S tier. This is where we find those reality warping punishments like being trapped in an endless time loop, reliving the same horrible moment over and over. No escape, no progression, just, suffering on repeat.
Yeah, kind of like a cosmic version of Groundhog Day, but instead of reliving the same day, it's your worst nightmare. On a loop. Forever.
That's going to be a hard pass for me.
And then there's the whole becoming a monster for eternity thing. And we're not talking about werewolves on full moon here. These are some next level horrifying creatures. They'd probably give H.P. Lovecraft nightmares.
It's like all your worst impulses, your darkest fears, all of it, given a physical form and set loose on the universe. Not exactly what I'd call a happy ending. Definitely not. But just when we thought this list had reached peak mind-bending, We arrive at the broken tier punishment so bizarre, so outside our realm of understanding, that it's almost impossible to even categorize them.
This is where the list really goes full cosmic horror.
Right. We're talking about things like being fragmented into infinite versions of yourself, each suffering in unique ways, but all connected through this web of shared pain.
It's like your very identity, your sense of self, shattered into a million pieces, and every single piece experiences its own personal hell.
Yeah, I'm not sure even therapy could unpack that one. But wait, there's more. How about having your existence unwritten across all timelines? It's like not only do you suffer, you were never even born in the first place.
The ultimate cosmic retcon.
Yeah.
It's like you never existed at all.
And just when we thought we'd reached the end of the line, there's one final tier. Beyond broken.
The realm of punishments, so abstract, so far beyond our understanding, that they almost defy language, defy thought itself.
This is where we get into concepts like, I don't know, ceasing to exist across all dimensions, past, present, future, you name it, it's gone. It's like the universe just goes, nope, never heard of them, and just wipes your slate clean.
And then there's the idea of punishments that extend even beyond the lifespan of the universe itself. Like even when time and space as we know them cease to be, your suffering continues.
It makes you wonder if maybe those ancient Greek punishments weren't so bad after all. Maybe Sisyphus just needs a better podcast to listen to.
Maybe. But I think what really fascinates me is that even when we're dealing with these totally incomprehensible punishments, they still tap into these very human anxieties. You know, this fear of oblivion, of meaningless suffering, of just like ceasing to be.
Right, like no matter how extreme, how fantastical these punishments get, they still reveal something about us, about our own relationship with these really big, really scary concepts. So I think we've definitely earned a nap after that roller coaster ride through, from plagues to existential dread. It's been a journey.
It has. But I think the biggest takeaway is just how much these punishments, in all their variety and sometimes sheer strangeness, how much they tell us about our fascination with justice, with consequences, with the very idea of good and evil. It's like we've been trying to understand these concepts for centuries, and these punishments, they're just one way we've tried to make sense of it all.
It's been quite the deep dive, literally. But unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today.
But before we go, I want to leave everyone with one final thought. If you were designing this whole divine justice system, what would it look like? Would you even include punishments at all? It's something to ponder.
Definitely something to think about. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking the tough questions, and for goodness sake, try not to anger any deities. See you all on the next deep dive.